This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Meredith Hughes, Cambridge, Massachusetts. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 11. In which the plot thickens. His visit to Monsieur de Tréville being paid, the pensive D'Artagnan took the longest way homeward. On what was D'Artagnan thinking, that he strayed thus from his path, gazing at the stars of heaven, and sometimes sighing, sometimes smiling? He was thinking of Madame Bonacieux. For an apprentice Musketeer, the young woman was almost an ideal of love. Pretty, mysterious, initiated in almost all the secrets of the court, which reflected such a charming gravity over her pleasing features, it might be surmised that she was not wholly unmoved. And this is an irresistible charm to novices in love. Moreover, D'Artagnan had delivered her from the hands of the demons who wished to search and ill-treat her, and this important service had established between them one of those sentiments of gratitude which so easily assume a more tender character. D'Artagnan already fancied himself, so rapid is the flight of our dreams upon the wings of imagination, accosted by a messenger from the young woman, who brought him some billet appointing a meeting, a gold chain, or a diamond. We have observed that young cavaliers received presents from their king without shame. Let us add that in these times of lax morality they had no more delicacy with respect to the mistresses, and that the latter almost always left them valuable and durable remembrances, as if they essayed to conquer the fragility of their sentiments by the solidity of their gifts. Without a blush, men made their way in the world by the means of women blushing. Such as were only beautiful gave their beauty, whence, without doubt, comes the proverb, "The most beautiful girl in the world can only give what she has." Such as were rich gave in addition a part of their money, and a vast number of heroes of that gallant period may be cited who would neither have won their spurs in the first place, nor their battles afterward, without the purse, more or less furnished, which their mistress fastened to the saddle-bow. D'Artagnan owned nothing. Provincial diffidence, that slight varnish, the ephemeral flower, that down of the peach, had evaporated to the winds through the little orthodox counsels which the Three Musketeers gave their friend. D'Artagnan, following the strange custom of the times, considered himself at Paris as on a campaign, neither more nor less than if he had been in Flanders. Spain yonder, woman here. In each there was an enemy to contend with, and contributions to be levied. But we must say, at the present moment, D'Artagnan was ruled by a feeling much more noble and disinterested. The mercer had said that he was rich. The young man might easily guess that, with so weak a man as Madame Bonacieux, and interest was almost foreign to this commencement of love, which had been the consequence of it. We say almost, for the idea that a young, handsome, kind, and witty woman is at the same time rich takes nothing from the beginning of love, but on the contrary strengthens it. There are in affluence a crowd of aristocratic cares and caprices which are highly becoming to beauty. A fine and white stocking, a silken robe, a lace kerchief, a pretty slipper on the foot, a tasty ribbon on the head do not make an ugly woman pretty, but they make a pretty woman beautiful, without reckoning the hands, which gain by all this. The hands, among women particularly, to be beautiful, must be idle. Then D'Artagnan, as the reader from whom we have not concealed the state of his fortune very well knows, D'Artagnan was not a millionaire. He hoped to become one some day, but the time which in his own mind he fixed upon for this happy change was still far distant. In the meanwhile, how disheartening to see the woman one loves long for those thousands of nothings which constitute a woman's happiness, and be unable to give her those thousands of nothings. At least, when the woman is rich and the lover is not, that which he cannot offer she offers to herself, and although it is generally with her husband's money that she procures herself this indulgence, the gratitude for it seldom reverts to him. Then D'Artagnan, disposed to become the most tender of lovers, was at the same time a very devoted friend. In the midst of his amorous projects for the mercer's wife, he did not forget his friends. The pretty Madame Bonacieux was just the woman to walk with in the Plain St. Denis, or in the Fair of St. Germain, in company with Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, to whom D'Artagnan had often remarked this. Then one could enjoy charming little dinners, where one touches on one side of the hand of a friend and on the other the foot of a mistress. Besides, on pressing occasions, in extreme difficulties, D'Artagnan would become the preserver of his friends. And Monsieur Bonacieux, whom D'Artagnan had pushed into the hands of the officers, denying him aloud, although he had promised in a whisper to save him. We are compelled to admit to our readers that D'Artagnan thought nothing about him in any way, or that if he did think of him, it was only to say to himself that he was very well where he was, wherever it might be. Love is the most selfish of all the passions. Let our readers reassure themselves. If D'Artagnan forgets his host, or appears to forget him under the pretense of not knowing where he has been carried, we will not forget him, and we know where he is. But for the moment, let us do as did the amorous Gascon. We will see after the worthy mercer later. D'Artagnan, reflecting on his future amours, addressing himself to the beautiful night and smiling at the stars, ascended the Rue Cherish-Midi, or Chase-Midi, as it was then called. As he found himself in the quarter in which Aramis lived, he took it into his head to pay his friend a visit in order to explain the motives which had led him to send Planchet with a request that he would come immediately into the mousetrap. Now, if Aramis had been at home when Planchet came to his abode, he had doubtless hastened to the Rue des Fossoyeurs, and finding nobody there but his other two companions perhaps, they would not be able to conceive what all this meant. This mystery required an explanation. At least, so D'Artagnan declared to himself. He likewise thought this was an opportunity for talking about pretty little Madame Bonacieux, of whom his head, if not his heart, was already full. We must never look for discretion in first love. First love is accompanied by such excessive joy that unless the joy be allowed to overflow, it will stifle you. Paris, for 2 hours past, had been dark and seemed a desert. 11 o'clock sounded from all the clocks in the Faubourg Saint-Germain. It was delightful weather. D'Artagnan was passing along a lane on the spot where the Rue d'Assas is now situated, breathing the balmy emanations which were borne upon the wind from the Rue de Vaugirard, and which arose from the gardens refreshed by the dews of evening and the breeze of night. From a distance resounded, deadened, however, by good shutters, the songs of the tipplers, enjoying themselves in the cabarets scattered along the plain. Arrived at the end of the lane, D'Artagnan turned to the left. The house in which Aramis dwelt was situated between the Rue Cassette and the Rue Servandoni. D'Artagnan had just passed the Rue Cassette and had already perceived the door of his friend's house, shaded by a mass of sycamores and clematis which formed a vast arch opposite the front of it, when he perceived something like a shadow issuing from the Rue Servandoni. This something was enveloped in a cloak, and D'Artagnan at first believed it was a man. But by the smallness of the form, the hesitation of the walk, and the indecision of the step, he soon discovered that it was a woman. Further, this woman, as if not certain of the house she was seeking, lifted up her eyes to look around her, stopped, went backward, and then returned again. D'Artagnan was perplexed. "Shall I go and offer her my services?" thought he. "By her step she must be young. Perhaps she is pretty. Oh, yes! But a woman who wanders in the streets at this hour only ventures out to meet her lover. If I should disturb a rendezvous, that would not be the best means of commencing an acquaintance." Meantime, the young woman continued to advance, counting the houses and windows. This was neither long nor difficult. There were but 3 hotels in this part of the street, and only 2 windows looking toward the road, one of which was in a pavilion parallel to that which Aramis occupied, the other belonging to Aramis himself. "Pardieu!" said D'Artagnan to himself, to whose mind the niece of the theologian reverted. "Pardieu! It would be droll if this belated dove should be in search of our friend's house. But on my soul it looks so. Ah, my dear Aramis, this time I shall find you out." And D'Artagnan, making himself as small as he could, concealed himself in the darkest side of the street, near a stone bench placed at the back of a niche. The young woman continued to advance, and in addition to the lightness of her step, which had betrayed her, she emitted a little cough which denoted a sweet voice. D'Artagnan believed this cough to be a signal. Nevertheless, whether the cough had been answered by a similar signal which had fixed the irresolution of the nocturnal seeker, or whether without this aid she saw that she had arrived at the end of her journey, she resolutely drew near to Aramis's shutter, and tapped, at 3 equal intervals, with her bent finger. "This is all very fine, dear Aramis," murmured D'Artagnan. "Ah, Monsieur Hypocrite, I understand how you study theology." The 3 blows were scarcely struck, when the inside blind was opened, and a light appeared through the panes of the outside shutter. "Ah, ah," said the listener, "not through doors, but through windows. Ah, this visit was expected. We shall see the windows open, and the lady enter by escalade. Very pretty." But, to the great astonishment of D'Artagnan, the shutter remained closed. Still more, the light which had shone for an instant disappeared, and all was again in obscurity. D'Artagnan thought this could not last long, and continued to look with all his eyes and listen with all his ears. He was right. At the end of some seconds, 2 sharp taps were heard inside. The young woman in the street replied by a single tap, and the shutter was opened a little way. It may be judged whether D'Artagnan looked or listened with avidity. Unfortunately, the light had been removed into another chamber. But the eyes of the young man were accustomed to the night. Besides, the eyes of the Gascons have, as it is asserted, like those of cats, the faculty of seeing in the dark. D'Artagnan then saw that the young woman took from her pocket a white object, which she unfolded quickly, and which took the form of a handkerchief. She made her interlocutor observe the corner of this unfolded object. This immediately recalled to D'Artagnan's mind the handkerchief which he had found at the feet of Mme. Bonacieux, which had reminded him of that which he had dragged from under the feet of Aramis. What the devil could that handkerchief signify? Placed where he was, D'Artagnan could not perceive the face of Aramis. We say Aramis because the young man entertained no doubt that it was his friend who held this dialogue from the interior with the lady of the exterior. Curiosity prevailed over prudence, and profiting by the preoccupation into which the sight of the handkerchief appeared to have plunged the 2 personages now on the scene, he stole from his hiding-place, and quick as lightning, but stepping with utmost caution, he ran and placed himself close to the angle of the wall, from which his eyes could pierce the interior of Aramis's room. Upon gaining this advantage, D'Artagnan was near uttering a cry of surprise. It was not Aramis who was conversing with the nocturnal visitor. It was a woman. D'Artagnan, however, could only see enough to recognize the form of her vestments, not enough to distinguish her features. At the same instant, the woman inside drew a second handkerchief from her pocket, and exchanged it for that which had just been shown to her. Then some words were spoken by the 2 women. At length the shutter closed. The woman who was outside the window turned round and passed within 4 steps of D'Artagnan, pulling down the hood of her mantle. But the precaution was too late. D'Artagnan had already recognized Mme. Bonacieux. Mme. Bonacieux! The suspicion that it was she had crossed the mind of D'Artagnan when she saw the handkerchief from her pocket. But what probability was there that Mme. Bonacieux, who had sent for Monsieur Laporte in order to be reconducted to the Louvre, should be running about the streets of Paris at 11:30 at night, at the risk of being abducted a second time? This must be, then, an affair of importance. And what is the most important affair to a woman of 25? Love. But was it on her own account, or on account of another, that she exposed herself to such hazards? This was a question the young man asked himself, whom the demon of jealousy already gnawed, being in heart neither more nor less than an accepted lover. There was a very simple means of satisfying himself whether Mme. Bonacieux was going. That was to follow her. This method was so simple that D'Artagnan employed it quite naturally and instinctively. But at the sight of the young man, who detached himself from the wall like a statue walking from its niche, and at the noise of the steps which she heard resound behind her, Mme. Bonacieux uttered a little cry and fled. D'Artagnan ran after her. It was not difficult for him to overtake a woman embarrassed with her cloak. He came up with her before she had traversed a third of the street. The unfortunate woman was exhausted, not by fatigue, but by terror, and when D'Artagnan placed his hand upon her shoulder, she sank upon one knee, crying in a choking voice, "Kill me if you please, you shall know nothing!" D'Artagnan raised her by passing his arm round her waist, but as he felt by her weight she was on the point of fainting, he made haste to reassure her by protestations of devotedness. These protestations were nothing for Mme. Bonacieux, for such protestations may be made with the worst intentions in the world, but the voice was all. Mme. Bonacieux thought she recognized the sound of that voice. She reopened her eyes, cast a quick glance upon the man who had terrified her so, and at once perceiving it was D'Artagnan, she uttered a cry of joy. "Oh, it is you! It is you! Thank God! Thank God!" "Yes, it is I," said D'Artagnan. "It is I whom God has sent to watch over you." "Was it with that intention you followed me?" asked the young woman, with a coquettish smile, whose somewhat bantering character resumed its influence, and with whom all fear had disappeared from the moment in which she recognized a friend in one she had taken for an enemy. "No," said D'Artagnan. "No, I confess it. It was chance that threw me in your way. I saw a woman knocking at the window of one of my friends." "One of your friends?" interrupted Mme. Bonacieux. "Without doubt. Aramis is one of my best friends." "Aramis? Who is he?" "Come, come, you won't tell me you don't know Aramis?" "This is the first time that I ever heard his name pronounced." "It is the first time, then, that you ever went to that house?" "Undoubtedly." "And you did not know that it was inhabited by a young man?" "No." "By a Musketeer?" "No, indeed." "It was not he, then, that you came to seek?" "Not the least in the world. Besides, you must have seen that the person to whom I spoke was a woman." "That is true, but this woman is a friend of Aramis." "I know nothing of that." "Since she lodges with him." "That does not concern me." "But who is she?" "Oh, that is not my secret." "My dear Mme. Bonacieux, you are charming, but at the same time you are one of the most mysterious women." "Do I lose by that?" "No, you are, on the contrary, adorable." "Give me your arm, then." "Most willingly. And now?" "Now escort me." "Where?" "Where I am going." "But where are you going?" "You will see, because you will leave me at the door." "Shall I wait for you?" "That will be useless." "You will return alone, then?" "Perhaps yes, perhaps no." "But will the person who shall accompany you afterward be a man or a woman?" "I don't know yet." "But I will know it." "How so?" "I will wait until you come out." "In that case, adieu." "Why so?" "I do not want you." "But you have claimed—" "The aid of a gentleman, not the watchfulness of a spy. The word is rather hard." "How are they called who follow others in spite of them?" "They are indiscreet." "The word is too mild." "Well, madame, I perceive I must do as you wish." "Why did you deprive yourself of the merit of doing so at once?" "Is there no merit in repentance?" "And do you really repent?" "I know nothing about it myself, but what I know is that I promise to do all that you wish if you allow me to accompany you where you are going." "And you will leave me then?" "Yes." "Without waiting for my coming out again?" "Yes." "Word of honor?" "By the faith of a gentleman. Take my arm and let us go." D'Artagnan offered his arm to Mme. Bonacieux, who willingly took it, half laughing, half trembling, and both gained the top of the Rue de la Harpe. Arriving there, the young woman seemed to hesitate, as she had done before in the Rue Vaugirard. She seemed, however, by certain signs, to recognize a door, and approaching that door, "And now, monsieur," said she, It is here I have business. 1,000 thanks for your honorable company, which has saved me from all the dangers to which, alone, I was exposed. But that moment is come to keep your word. I have reached my destination." "And you will have nothing to fear on your return?" "I shall have nothing to fear but robbers." "And that is nothing?" "What could they take from me? I have not a penny about me." "You forget that beautiful handkerchief with the coat of arms." "Which?" "That which I found at your feet and replaced in your pocket." "Hold your tongue, imprudent man! Do you wish to destroy me?" "You see very plainly that there is still danger for you, since a single word makes you tremble, and you confess that if that word were heard you would be ruined." "Come, come, madame!" cried D'Artagnan, seizing her hands and surveying her with an ardent glance. "Come, be more generous. Confide in me. Have you not read in my eyes that there is nothing but devotion and sympathy in my heart?" "Yes," replied Mme. Bonacieux. "Therefore ask my own secrets, and I will reveal them to you. But those of others, that is quite another thing." "Very well," said D'Artagnan, "I shall discover them. As these secrets may have an influence over your life, these secrets must become mine." "Beware of what you do!" cried the young woman, in a manner so serious as to make D'Artagnan start in spite of himself. "Oh, meddle in nothing which concerns me. Do not seek to assist me in that matter which I am accomplishing. This I ask of you in the name of the interest with which I inspire you, in the name of the service you have rendered me, and which I shall never forget while I have life. Rather, place faith in what I tell you. Have no more concern about me. I exist no longer for you, any more than if you had never seen me." "Must Aramis do as much as I, madame?" said D'Artagnan, deeply piqued. "This is the second or third time, monsieur, that you have repeated that name, and yet I have told you that I do not know him." "You do not know the man at whose shutter you have just knocked? Indeed, madame, you believe me too credulous." "Confess that it is for the sake of making me talk that you invent this story and create this personage." "I invent nothing, madame. I create nothing. I only speak the exact truth." "And you say that one of your friends lives in that house?" "I say so, and I repeat it for the third time. That house is one inhabited by my friend, and that friend is Aramis." "All this will be cleared up at a later period," murmured the young woman. "No, monsieur, be silent." "If you could see my heart," said D'Artagnan, "you would there read so much curiosity that you would pity me, and so much love that you would instantly satisfy my curiosity. We have nothing to fear from those who love us." "You speak very suddenly of love," said the young woman, shaking her head. "That is because love has come suddenly upon me, and for the first time, and because I am only 20." The young woman looked at him furtively. "Listen, I am already upon the scent," resumed D'Artagnan. "About 3 months ago I was near having a duel with Aramis concerning a handkerchief resembling the one you showed to the woman in his house, for a handkerchief marked in the same manner, I am sure." "Monsieur," said the young woman, "you weary me very much, I assure you, with your questions." "But you, madame, prudent as you are, think if you were to be arrested with that handkerchief, and that handkerchief were to be seized, would you not be compromised?" "In what way? The initials are only mine, C.B. Constance Bonacieux." "Or Camille de Bois Tracy." "Silence, monsieur! Once again, silence! Ah, since the dangers I incur on my own account cannot stop you, think of those you may yourself run." "Me?" "Yes, there is peril of imprisonment, risk of life, in knowing me." "Then I will not leave you." "Monsieur," said the young woman, supplicating him and clasping her hands together, "monsieur, in the name of heaven, by the honor of a soldier, by the courtesy of a gentleman, depart. There midnight sounds. That is the hour when I am expected." "Madame," said the young man, bowing, "I can refuse nothing asked of me thus. Be content, I will depart." "But you will not follow me? You will not watch me?" "I will return home instantly." "Ah, I was quite sure you were a good and brave young man," said Mme. Bonacieux, holding out her hand to him, and placing the other upon the knocker of a little door almost hidden in the wall. D'Artagnan seized the hand held out to him, and kissed it ardently. "Ah, I wish I had never seen you!" cried D'Artagnan, with that ingenuous roughness which women often prefer to the affectations of politeness, because it betrays the depths of the thought and proves that feeling prevails over reason. "Well," resumed Mme. Bonacieux, in a voice almost caressing, and pressing the hand of D'Artagnan, who had not relinquished hers, "well, I will not say as much as you do. What is lost for today may not be lost forever. Who knows when I shall be at liberty that I may not satisfy your curiosity?" "And will you make the same promise to my love?" cried D'Artagnan, beside himself with joy. "Oh, as to that, I do not engage myself. That depends upon the sentiments with which you may inspire me." "Then today, madame—" "Oh, today I am no further than gratitude." "Ah, you are too charming," said D'Artagnan sorrowfully, "and you abuse my love." "No, I use your generosity, that's all. But be of good cheer. With certain people everything comes round." "Oh, you render me the happiest of men. Do not forget this evening. Do not forget that promise." "Be satisfied. In the proper time and place I will remember everything. Now then, go, go, in the name of heaven! I was expected at sharp midnight, and I am late." "By 5 minutes." "Yes, but in certain circumstances 5 minutes are 5 ages." "When one loves." "Well, and who told you I had no affair with a lover?" "It is a man, then, who expects you?" cried D'Artagnan. "A man?" "The discussion is going to begin again," said Mme. Bonacieux, with a half smile, which was not exempt from a tinge of impatience. "No, no, I go, I depart. I believe in you, and I would have all the merit of my devotion, even if that devotion were stupidity. Adieu, madame, adieu." And as if he only felt strength to detach himself by a violent effort from the hand he held, he sprang away, running, while Mme. Bonacieux knocked, as at the shutter, 3 light and regular taps. When he had gained the angle of the street, he turned. The door had been opened and shut again. The mercer's pretty wife had disappeared. D'Artagnan pursued his way. He had given his word not to watch Mme. Bonacieux, and if his life had depended upon the spot to which she was going or upon the person who should accompany her, D'Artagnan would have returned home, since he had so promised. 5 minutes later, he was in the Rue des Fossoyeurs. "Poor Athos," said he, "he will never guess what all this means. He will have fallen asleep waiting for me, or else he will have returned home, where he will have learned that a woman had been there. A woman with Athos! After all," continued D'Artagnan, "there was certainly one with Aramis. All this is very strange, and I am curious to know how it will end." "Badly, monsieur, badly," replied a voice, which the young man recognized as that of Planchet, for, soliloquizing aloud, as very preoccupied people do, he had entered the alley, at the end of which were the stairs which led to his chamber. "How badly? What do you mean by that, you idiot?" asked D'Artagnan. "What has happened?" "All sorts of misfortunes." "What?" "In the first place, Monsieur Athos is arrested." "Arrested? Athos arrested? What for?" "He was found in your lodging. They took him for you." "And by whom was he arrested?" "By guards brought by the men in black whom you put to flight." "Why did he not tell them his name? Why did he not tell them he knew nothing about this affair?" "He took care not to do so, monsieur. On the contrary, he came up to me and said, 'It is your master that needs his liberty at this moment, and not I, since he knows everything and I know nothing. They will believe he is arrested, and that will give him time. In 3 days I will tell them who I am, and they cannot fail to let me go.'" "Brave Athos! Noble heart!" murmured D'Artagnan. "I know him well there. And what did the officers do?" "4 conveyed him away, I don't know where, to the Bastille or Fort l'Evêque. 2 remained with the men in black, who rummaged every place and took all the papers. The last 2 mounted guard at the door during this examination. Then, when all was over, they went away, leaving the house empty and exposed." "And Porthos and Aramis?" "I could not find them. They did not come." But they may come any moment, for you left word that I awaited them." "Yes, monsieur." "Well, don't budge then. If they come, tell them what has happened. Let them wait for me at the Pomme de Pin. Here it would be dangerous; the house may be watched. I will run to Monsieur de Tréville to tell them all this, and will meet them there." "Very well, monsieur," said Planchet. "But you will remain? You are not afraid?" said D'Artagnan, coming back to recommend courage to his lackey. "Be easy, monsieur," said Planchet. "You do not know me yet. I am brave when I set about it. It is all in beginning. Besides, I am a Picard." "Then it is understood," said D'Artagnan. "You would rather be killed than desert your post?" "Yes, monsieur, and there is nothing I would not do to prove to monsieur that I am attached to him." "Good," said D'Artagnan to himself. "It appears that the method I have adopted with this boy is decidedly the best. I shall use it again upon occasion." And with all the swiftness of his legs, already a little fatigued, however, with the perambulations of the day, D'Artagnan directed his course toward Monsieur de Tréville's. Monsieur de Tréville was not at his hôtel. His company was on guard at the Louvre. He was at the Louvre with his company. It was necessary to reach Monsieur de Tréville. It was important that he should be informed of what was passing. D'Artagnan resolved to try and enter the Louvre. His costume of guardsman in the company of Monsieur Dessessart ought to be his passport. He therefore went down the Rue des Petits Augustins and came up to the quay, in order to take the new bridge. He had at first an idea of crossing by the ferry, but on gaining the riverside he had mechanically put his hand into his pocket, and perceived that he had not wherewithal to pay his passage. As he gained the top of the Rue Guénégaud, he saw two persons coming out of the Rue Dauphine, whose appearance very much struck him. Of the two persons who composed this group, one was a man and the other a woman. The woman had the outline of Madame Bonacieux. The man resembled Aramis, so much as to be mistaken for him. Besides, the woman wore that black mantle which D'Artagnan could still see outlined on the shutter of the Rue de Vaugirard and on the door of the Rue de la Harpe. Still further, the man wore the uniform of a Musketeer. The woman's hood was pulled down, and the man held a handkerchief to his face. Both, as this double precaution indicated, had an interest in not being recognized. They took the bridge. That was D'Artagnan's road, as he was going to the Louvre. D'Artagnan followed them. He had not gone 20 steps before he became convinced that the woman really was Madame Bonacieux, and that the man was Aramis. He felt at that instant all the suspicions of jealousy agitating his heart. He felt himself doubly betrayed, by his friend and by her whom he already loved like a mistress. Madame Bonacieux had declared to him, by all the gods, that she did not know Aramis, and a quarter of an hour after having made this assertion, he found her hanging on the arm of Aramis. D'Artagnan did not reflect that he had only known the mercer's pretty wife for 3 hours, that she owed him nothing but a little gratitude for having delivered her from the men in black, who wished to carry her off, and that she had promised him nothing. He considered himself an outraged, betrayed, and ridiculed lover. Blood and anger mounted to his face. He was resolved to unravel the mystery. The young man and young woman perceived they were watched, and redoubled their speed. D'Artagnan determined upon his course. He passed them, then returned so as to meet them exactly before the Samaritaine, which was illuminated by a lamp which threw its light all over that part of the bridge. D'Artagnan stopped before them, and they stopped before him. "What do you want, monsieur?" demanded the Musketeer, recoiling a step, and with a foreign accent, which proved to D'Artagnan that he was deceived in one of his conjectures. "It is not Aramis," cried he. "No, monsieur, it is not Aramis, and by your exclamation I perceive you have mistaken me for another, and pardon you." "You pardon me?" cried D'Artagnan. "Yes," replied the stranger. "Allow me, then, to pass on, since it is not with me you have anything to do." "You are right, monsieur, it is not with you that I have anything to do. It is with Madame." "With Madame? You do not know her," replied the stranger. "You are deceived, monsieur. I know her very well." "Ah," said Mme. Bonacieux in a tone of reproach, "ah, monsieur, I had your promise as a soldier and your word as a gentleman. I hoped to be able to rely upon that." "And I, madame," said D'Artagnan, embarrassed, "you promised me—" "Take my arm, madame," said the stranger, "and let us continue our way." D'Artagnan, however, stupefied, cast down, annihilated by all that happened, stood with crossed arms before the Musketeer and Mme. Bonacieux. The Musketeer advanced 2 steps, and pushed D'Artagnan aside with his hand. D'Artagnan made a spring backward and drew his sword. At the same time, with the rapidity of lightning, the stranger drew his. "In the name of heaven, my Lord!" cried Mme. Bonacieux, throwing herself between the combatants and seizing the swords with her hands. "My Lord!" cried D'Artagnan, enlightened by a sudden idea. "My Lord! Pardon me, monsieur, but you are not—" "My Lord, the Duke of Buckingham," said Mme. Bonacieux in an undertone, "and now you may ruin us all." "My Lord, Madame, I ask 100 pardons. But I love her, my Lord, and was jealous. You know what it is to love, my Lord. Pardon me, and then tell me how I can risk my life to serve your Grace." "You are a brave young man," said Buckingham, holding out his hand to D'Artagnan, who pressed it respectfully. "You offer me your services. With the same frankness, I accept them. Follow us at a distance of 20 paces, as far as the Louvre, and if anyone watches us, slay him." D'Artagnan placed his naked sword under his arm, allowed the duke and Mme. Bonacieux to take 20 steps ahead, and then followed them, ready to execute the instructions of the noble and elegant minister of Charles I. Fortunately, he had no opportunity to give the duke this proof of his devotion, and the young woman and the handsome Musketeer entered the Louvre by the wicket of the Echelle without any interference. As for D'Artagnan, he immediately repaired to the cabaret of the Pomme de Pin, where he found Porthos and Aramis awaiting him. Without giving them any explanation of the alarm and inconvenience he had caused them, he told them that he had terminated the affair alone, in which he had for a moment believed he should need their assistance. Meanwhile, carried away as we are by our narrative, we must leave our 3 friends to themselves, and follow the Duke of Buckingham and his guide through the labyrinths of the Louvre. End of chapter 11.
This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 12. George Villiers, Duke of Buckingham. Mademoiselle Bonacieux and the Duke entered the Louvre without difficulty. Mademoiselle Bonacieux was known to belong to the Queen. The Duke wore the uniform of the Musketeers of Monsieur de Tréville, who, as we have said, were that evening on guard. Besides, Germain was in the interests of the Queen, and if anything should happen, Mademoiselle Bonacieux would be accused of having introduced her lover into the Louvre. That was all. She took the risk upon herself. Her reputation would be lost, it is true, but of what value in the world was the reputation of the little wife of a mercer? Once within the interior of the court, the Duke and the young woman followed the wall for the space of about 25 steps. This space passed, Mademoiselle Bonacieux pushed the little servant's door, open by day, but generally closed at night. The door yielded. Both entered and found themselves in darkness. But Mademoiselle Bonacieux was acquainted with all the turnings and windings of this part of the Louvre, appropriated for the people of the household. She closed the door after her, took the Duke by the hand, and after a few experimental steps, grasped a balustrade, put her foot upon the bottom step, and began to ascend the staircase. The Duke counted 2 stories. She then turned to the right, followed the course of a long corridor, descended a flight, went a few steps farther, introduced a key into a lock, opened a door, and pushed the Duke into an apartment lighted only by a lamp, saying, "Remain here, my Lord Duke. Someone will come." She then went out by the same door, which she locked, so that the Duke found himself literally a prisoner. Nevertheless, isolated as he was, we must say that the Duke of Buckingham did not experience an instant of fear. One of the salient points of his character was the search for adventures and a love of romance. Brave, rash, and enterprising, this was not the first time he had risked his life in such attempts. He had learned that the pretended message from Anne of Austria, upon the faith of which he had come to Paris, was a snare. But instead of regaining England, he had, abusing the position in which he had been placed, declared to the Queen that he would not depart without seeing her. The Queen had at first positively refused, but at length became afraid that the Duke, if exasperated, would commit some folly. She had already decided upon seeing him, and urging his immediate departure, when, on the very evening of coming to this decision, Mademoiselle Bonacieux, who was charged with going to fetch the Duke and conducting him to the Louvre, was abducted. For 2 days no one knew what had become of her, and everything remained in suspense. But once free, and placed in communication with Laporte, matters resumed their course, and she accomplished the perilous enterprise which, but for her arrest, would have been executed 3 days earlier. Buckingham, left alone, walked toward a mirror. His Musketeer's uniform became him marvelously. At 35, which was then his age, he passed, with just title, for the handsomest gentleman and the most elegant cavalier of France or England. The favorite of 2 kings, immensely rich, all-powerful in the kingdom which he disordered at his fancy and calmed again at his caprice, George Villiers, Duke of Buckingham, had lived one of those fabulous existences which survive in the course of centuries to astonish posterity. Sure of himself, convinced of his own power, certain that the laws which rule other men could not reach him, he went straight to the object he aimed at, even where this object were so elevated and so dazzling that it would have been madness for any other man to have contemplated it. It was thus he had succeeded in approaching several times the beautiful and proud Anne of Austria, and in making himself loved by dazzling her. George Villiers placed himself before the glass, as we have said, restored the undulations to his beautiful hair, which the weight of his hat had disordered, twisted his mustache, and, his heart swelling with joy, happy and proud at being near the moment he had so long sighed for, he smiled upon himself with pride and hope. At this moment a door concealed in the tapestry opened, and a woman appeared. Buckingham saw this apparition in the glass. He uttered a cry. It was the Queen. Anne of Austria was then 26 or 27 years of age. That is to say, she was in the full splendor of her beauty. Her carriage was that of a queen or a goddess. Her eyes, which cast the brilliancy of emeralds, were perfectly beautiful, and yet were at the same time full of sweetness and majesty. Her mouth was small and rosy, and although her underlip, like that of all princes of the House of Austria, protruded slightly beyond the other, it was eminently lovely in its smile, but as profoundly disdainful in its contempt. Her skin was admired for its velvety softness. Her hands and arms were of surpassing beauty, all the poets of the time singing them as incomparable. Lastly, her hair, which, from being light in her youth, had become chestnut, and which she wore curled very plainly and with much powder, admirably set off her face, in which the most rigid critic could only have desired a little less rouge, and the most fastidious sculptor a little more fineness in the nose. Buckingham remained for a moment dazzled. Never had Anna of Austria appeared to him so beautiful, amid balls, fêtes, or carousels, as she appeared to him at this moment, dressed in a simple robe of white satin, and accompanied by Donna Estefania, the only one of her Spanish women who had not been driven from her by the jealousy of the king or by the persecutions of Richelieu. Anne of Austria took 2 steps forward. Buckingham threw himself at her feet, and before the queen could prevent him, kissed the hem of her robe. "Duke, you already know that it is not I who caused you to be written to." "Yes, yes, madame, yes, your majesty," cried the duke. I know that I must have been mad, senseless, to believe that snow would become animated or marble warm. But what then? They who love believe easily in love. Besides, I have lost nothing by this journey because I see you." "Yes," replied Anne, "but you know why, and how I see you. Because, insensible to all my sufferings, you persist in remaining in a city where, by remaining, you run the risk of your life, and make me run the risk of my honor. I see you to tell you that everything separates us, the depths of the sea, the enmity of kingdoms, the sanctity of vows. It is sacrilege to struggle against so many things, my lord. In short, I see you to tell you that we must never see each other again." "Speak on, madam, speak on, queen," said Buckingham. "The sweetness of your voice covers the harshness of your words. You talk of sacrilege. Why, the sacrilege is the separation of two hearts formed by God for each other." "My lord," cried the queen, "you forget that I have never said that I love you." "But you have never told me that you did not love me, and truly, to speak such words to me would be, on the part of your majesty, too great an ingratitude. For tell me, where can you find a love like mine? A love which neither time, nor absence, nor despair can extinguish. A love which contents itself with a lost ribbon, a stray look, or a chance word. It is now 3 years, madame, since I saw you for the first time, and during those 3 years I have loved you thus. Shall I tell you each ornament of your toilette? Mark, I see you now. You were seated upon cushions in the Spanish fashion. You wore a robe of green satin, embroidered with gold and silver. Hanging sleeves knotted upon your beautiful arms, those lovely arms, with large diamonds. You wore a close ruff, a small cap upon your head of the same color as your robe, and in that cap a heron's feather. Hold, hold! I shut my eyes, and I can see you as you were then. I open them again, and I see what you are now, 100 times more beautiful." "What folly!" murmured Anne of Austria, who had not the courage to find fault with the duke for having so well preserved her portrait in his heart. "What folly to feed a useless passion with such remembrances!" "And upon what, then, must I live? I have nothing but memory. It is my happiness, my treasure, my hope. Every time I see you is a fresh diamond, which I enclose in the casket of my heart. This is the 4th which you have let fall, and I have picked up. For in 3 years, madame, I have only seen you 4 times. The first, which I have described to you. The second, at the mansion of Madame de Chevreuse. The third, in the gardens of Amiens." "Duke," said the queen, blushing, "never speak of that evening." "Oh, let us speak of it! On the contrary, let us speak of it! That is the most happy and brilliant evening of my life. You remember what a beautiful night it was? How soft and perfumed was the air! How lovely the blue heavens and star-enameled sky! Ah! Then, madame, I was able for one instant to be alone with you. Then you were about to tell me all, the isolation of your life, the griefs of your heart. You leaned upon my arm. Upon this, madame, I felt, in bending my head toward you, your beautiful hair touch my cheek. And every time that it touched me, I trembled from head to foot. Oh, queen, queen, you do not know what felicity from heaven, what joys from paradise are comprised in a moment like that. Take my wealth, my fortune, my glory, all the days I have to live, for such an instant, for a night like that. For that night, madame, that night you loved me, I will swear it." "My lord, yes. It is possible that the influence of the place, The charm of the beautiful evening, the fascination of your look, the thousand circumstances, in short, which sometimes unite to destroy a woman, were grouped around me on that fatal evening. But, my lord, you saw the queen come to the aid of the woman who faltered. At the first word you dared to utter, at the first freedom to which I had to reply, I called for help. Yes, that is true. And any other love but mine would have sunk beneath this ordeal. But my love came out from it more ardent and more eternal. You believed that you would fly from me by returning to Paris. You believed that I would not dare to quit the treasure over which my master had charged me to watch. What to me were all the treasures in the world, or all the kings of the earth? 8 days after, I was back again, madame. That time you had nothing to say to me. I had risked my life in favor to see you but for a second. I did not even touch your hand, and you pardoned me on seeing me so submissive and so repentant. Yes, but calumny seized upon all those follies in which I took no part, as you know well, my lord. The king, excited by the cardinal, made a terrible clamor. Madame de Verneuil was driven from me. Putange was exiled. Madame de Chevreuse fell into disgrace, and when you wished to come back as ambassador to France, the king himself, remember, my lord, the king himself opposed to it. Yes, and France is about to pay for her king's refusal, with the war. I am not allowed to see you, madame, but you shall every day hear of me. What object, think you, have this expedition to Ré and this league with the Protestants of La Rochelle, which I am projecting? The pleasure of seeing you. I have no hope of penetrating, sword in hand, to Paris, I know that well. But this war may bring round a peace. This peace will require a negotiator. That negotiator will be me. They will not dare to refuse me then, and I will return to Paris, and will see you again, and will be happy for an instant. Thousands of men, it is true, will have to pay for my happiness with their lives. But what is that to me, provided I see you again? All this is perhaps folly, perhaps insanity. But tell me, what woman has a lover more truly in love? What queen a servant more ardent? My lord, you invoke in your defense things which accuse you more strongly. All these proofs of love which you would give me are almost crimes. Because you do not love me, madame. If you loved me, you would view all this otherwise. If you loved me, that would be too great of happiness, and I should run mad. Ah, Madame de Chevreuse was less cruel than you. Holland loved her, and she responded to his love. Madame de Chevreuse was not queen, murmured Anne of Austria, overcome in spite of herself by the expression of so profound a passion. You would love me, then, if you were not queen. Madam, say that you would love me then. I can believe that it is the dignity of your rank alone which makes you cruel to me. I can believe that had you been Madame de Chevreuse, poor Buckingham might have hoped. Thanks for those sweet words. Oh, my beautiful sovereign, 100 times thanks. Oh, my lord, you have ill understood, wrongly interpreted. I did not mean to say— Silence, silence, cried the duke. If I am happy in an error, do not have the cruelty to lift me from it. You have told me yourself, madame, that I have been drawn into a snare. I perhaps may leave my life in it. Although it may be strange, I have for some time had a presentiment that I should shortly die. And the duke smiled, with a smile at once sad and charming. Oh, my God! cried Anne of Austria, with an accent of terror, which proved how much greater an interest she took in the duke than she ventured to tell. I do not tell you this, madame, to terrify you. No, it is even ridiculous for me to name it to you, and believe me, I take no heed of such dreams. But the words you have just spoken, the hope you have almost given me, will have richly paid all, were it my life. "Oh, but I," said Anne, "I also, Duke, have had presentiments. I also have had dreams. I dreamed that I saw you lying bleeding, wounded." "In the left side, was it not, and with a knife?" interrupted Buckingham. "Yes, it was so, my lord, it was so. In the left side, and with a knife. Who can possibly have told you I had that dream? I have imparted it to no one but my God, and that in my prayers." "I ask for no more. You love me, madame. It is enough." "I love you? I?" "Yes, yes. Would God send the same dreams to you as to me if you did not love me? Should we have the same presentiments if our existences did not touch at the heart? You love me, my beautiful queen, and you will weep for me?" "Oh, my God!" cried Anne of Austria. "This is more than I can bear. In the name of heaven, Duke, leave me, go. I do not know whether I love you or love you not. But what I know is that I will not be perjured. Take pity on me, then, and go. Oh, if you are struck in France, if you die in France, if I could imagine that your love for me was the cause of your death, I could not console myself. I should run mad. Depart, then. Depart, I implore you." "Oh, how beautiful you are thus! Oh, how I love you!" said Buckingham. "Go, go, I implore you, and return hereafter. Come back as ambassador. Come back as minister. Come back surrounded with guards who will defend you, with servants who will watch over you, and then I shall no longer fear for your days, and I shall be happy in seeing you." "Oh, is this true what you say?" "Yes." "Oh, then some pledge of your indulgence, some object which came from you, and may remind me that I have not been dreaming, something you have worn, and that I may wear in my turn, a ring, a necklace, a chain." "Will you depart if I give you your demand?" "Yes." "This very instant?" "Yes." "You will leave France? You will return to England?" "I will, I swear to you." "Wait, then, wait." Anne of Austria re-entered her apartment, and came out again almost immediately, holding a rosewood casket in her hand, with her cipher encrusted with gold. "Here, my lord, here," said she. "Keep this in memory of me." Buckingham took the casket, and fell a second time on his knees. "You have promised me to go," said the queen. "And I keep my word. Your hand, madame, your hand, and I depart." Anne of Austria stretched forth her hand, closing her eyes, and leaning with the other upon Estafania, for she felt that her strength was about to fail her. Buckingham pressed his lips passionately to that beautiful hand, and then, rising, said, "Within 6 months, if I am not dead, I shall have seen you again, madame, even if I have to overturn the world." And faithful to the promise he had made, he rushed out of the apartment. In the corridor he met Mademoiselle Bonacieux, who waited for him, and who, with the same precautions and the same good luck, conducted him out of the Louvre. End of chapter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 13. Monsieur Bonacieux. There was in all this, as may have been observed, one personage concerned of whom, notwithstanding his precarious position, we have appeared to take but very little notice. This personage was Monsieur Bonacieux, the respectable martyr of the political and amorous intrigues which entangled themselves so nicely together at this gallant and chivalric period. Fortunately, the reader may remember, or may not remember, we have promised not to lose sight of him. The officers who arrested him conducted him straight to the Bastille, where he passed trembling before a party of soldiers who were loading their muskets. Thence, introduced into a half-subterranean gallery, he became, on the part of those who had brought him, the object of the grossest insults and the harshest treatment. The officers perceived that they had not to deal with a gentleman, and they treated him like a very peasant. At the end of half an hour or thereabouts, a clerk came to put an end to his tortures, but not to his anxiety, by giving the order to conduct Monsieur Bonacieux to the chamber of examination. Ordinarily, prisoners were interrogated in their cells, but they did not do so with Monsieur Bonacieux. 2 guards attended the mercer, who made him traverse a court and enter a corridor in which there were 3 sentinels, opened a door and pushed him unceremoniously into a low room, where the only furniture was a table, a chair, and a commissary. The commissary was seated in the chair and was writing at the table. The 2 guards led the prisoner toward the table, and upon a sign from the commissary drew back so far as to be unable to hear anything. The commissary, who had till this time held his head down over his papers, looked up to see what sort of person he had to do with. This commissary was a man of very repulsive mien, with a pointed nose, with yellow and salient cheekbones, with eyes small but keen and penetrating, and an expression of countenance resembling at once the polecat and the fox. His head, supported by a long and flexible neck, issued from his large black robe, balancing itself with a motion very much like that of the tortoise thrusting his head out of his shell. He began by asking Monsieur Bonacieux his name, age, condition, and abode. The accused replied that his name was Jacques Michel Bonacieux, that he was 51 years old, a retired mercer, and lived at Rue de Fossoyeurs, numero 14. The commissary then, instead of continuing to interrogate him, made a long speech upon the danger there is for an obscure citizen to meddle with public matters. He complicated this exordium by an exposition in which he painted the power and the deeds of the cardinal, that incomparable minister, that conqueror of past ministers, that example for ministers to come, deeds and power which none could thwart with impunity. After this second part of his discourse, fixing his hawk's eye upon poor Bonacieux, he bade him reflect upon the gravity of his situation. The reflections of the mercer were already made. He cursed the instant when Monsieur Laporte formed the idea of marrying him to his goddaughter, and particularly the moment when that goddaughter had been received as Lady of the Linen to her Majesty. At bottom, the character of Monsieur Bonacieux was one of profound selfishness, mixed with sordid avarice, the whole seasoned with extreme cowardice. The love with which his young wife had inspired him was a secondary sentiment, and was not strong enough to contend with the primitive feelings we have just enumerated. Bonacieux, indeed, reflected upon what had just been said to him. "But, Monsieur Commissary," said he calmly, "believe that I know and appreciate, more than anybody, the merit of the incomparable eminence by whom we have the honor to be governed." "Indeed?" asked the commissary with an air of doubt. "If that is really so, how came you to the Bastille?" "How came I there, or rather why I am there?" replied Bonacieux. "That is entirely impossible for me to tell you, because I don't know myself, but to a certainty it is not for having, knowingly at least, disobliged Monsieur de Cardinal." "You must, nevertheless, have committed a crime, since you are here and are accused of high treason." "Of high treason!" cried Bonacieux, terrified. "Of high treason! How is it possible for a poor mercer, who detests Huguenots and who abhors Spaniards, to be accused of high treason? Consider, monsieur, the thing is absolutely impossible." "Monsieur Bonacieux," said the commissary, looking at the accused as if his little eyes had the faculty of reading to the very depths of hearts, "you have a wife?" "Yes, monsieur," replied the mercer in a tremble, feeling that it was at this point affairs were likely to become perplexing. That is to say, I had one. What? You had one? What have you done with her, then, if you have her no longer? They have abducted her, monsieur. They have abducted her? Ha! Bonacieux inferred from this ah that the affair grew more and more intricate. They have abducted her, added the commissary. And do you know the man who has committed this deed? I think I know him. Who is he? Remember that I affirm nothing, monsieur the commissary, and that I only suspect. Whom do you suspect? Come, answer freely. Monsieur Bonacieux was in the greatest perplexity possible. Had he better deny everything, or tell everything? By denying all, it might be suspected that he must know too much to avow. By confessing all, he might prove his good will. He decided then to tell all. I suspect, said he, a tall, dark man of lofty carriage, who is the heir of a great lord. He has followed us several times, I think, when I have waited for my wife at the wicket of the Louvre to escort her home. The commissary now appeared to experience a little uneasiness. And his name? Said he. Oh, as to his name, I know nothing about it. But if I were ever to meet him, I should recognize him in an instant. I will answer for it, were he among 1,000 persons. The face of the commissary grew still darker. You should recognize him among 1,000, say you? Continued he. That is to say, cried Bonacieux, who saw he had taken a false step, that is to say— You have answered that you should recognize him, said the commissary. That is all very well, and enough for today. Before we proceed further, someone must be informed that you know the ravisher of your wife. But I have told you I don't know him, cried Bonacieux in despair. I have told you, on the contrary— Take away the prisoner, said the commissary to the 2 guards. Where must we place him? Demanded the chief. In a dungeon. Which? Good Lord, in the first one handy, provided it is safe, said the commissary, with an indifference which penetrated poor Bonacieux with horror. Alas, alas, said he to himself, misfortune is over my head. My wife must have committed some frightful crime. They believe me her accomplice, and will punish me with her. She must have spoken. She must have confessed everything. A woman is so weak. A dungeon! The first he comes to. That's it. A night is soon past, and tomorrow to the wheel, to the gallows. Oh, my God, have pity on me! Without listening the least in the world to the lamentations of Monsieur Bonacieux, lamentations to which, besides, they must have been pretty well accustomed, the 2 guards took the prisoner each by an arm, and led him away, while the commissary wrote a letter in haste and dispatched it by an officer in waiting. Bonacieux could not close his eyes, not because his dungeon was so very disagreeable, but because his uneasiness was so great. He sat all night on his stool, starting at the least noise, and when the first rays of the sun penetrated into his chamber, the dawn itself appeared to him to have taken funereal tints. All at once he heard his bolts drawn, and made a terrified bound. He believed they were come to conduct him to the scaffold, so that when he saw merely and simply, instead of the executioner he expected, only his commissary of the preceding evening, attended by his clerk, he was ready to embrace them both. Your affair has become more complicated since yesterday evening, my good man, and I advise you to tell the whole truth, for your repentance alone can remove the anger of the cardinal. Why, I am ready to tell everything, cried Bonacieux. At least, all that I know. Interrogate me, I entreat you. Where is your wife, in the first place? Why, did I not tell you she'd been stolen from me? Yes, but yesterday at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, thanks to you, she escaped. My wife escaped? Cried Bonacieux. Oh, unfortunate creature! Monsieur, if she has escaped, it is not my fault, I swear. What business had you, then, to go into the chamber of Monsieur d'Artagnan, your neighbor, with whom you had a long conference during the day?"
"Ah, yes, Monsieur Commissary. Yes, that is true, and I confess I was in the wrong. I did go to Monsieur d'Artagnan's."
"What was the aim of that visit?"
"To beg him to assist me in finding my wife. I believed I had a right to endeavor to find her. I was deceived, as it appears, and I ask your pardon."
"And what did Monsieur d'Artagnan reply?"
"Monsieur d'Artagnan promised me his assistance, but I soon found out that he was betraying me."
"You impose upon justice. Monsieur d'Artagnan made a compact with you, and in virtue of that compact put to flight the police who had arrested your wife, and has placed her beyond reach. Fortunately, Monsieur d'Artagnan is in our hands, and you shall be confronted with him."
"By my faith, I ask no better," cried Bonacieux. "I shall not be sorry to see the face of an acquaintance."
"Bring in the Monsieur d'Artagnan," said the commissary to the guards.
The two guards led in Athos.
"Monsieur d'Artagnan," said the commissary, addressing Athos, "declare all that has passed yesterday between you and Monsieur."
"But," cried Bonacieux, "this is not Monsieur d'Artagnan who you show me."
"What? Not Monsieur d'Artagnan?" exclaimed the commissary.
"Not the least in the world," replied Bonacieux.
"What is this gentleman's name?" asked the commissary.
"I cannot tell you. I don't know him."
"How? You don't know him?"
"No."
"Did you never see him?"
"Yes, I have seen him, but I don't know what he calls himself."
"Your name?" replied the commissary.
"Athos," replied the Musketeer.
"But that is not a man's name. It is the name of a mountain," cried the poor questioner, who was beginning to lose his head.
"That is my name," said Athos quietly.
"But you said that your name was D'Artagnan."
"Who? I?"
"Yes, you."
"Somebody said to me,
'You're Monsieur d'Artagnan?'
I answered,
'You think so?'
My guards exclaimed that they were sure of it.
I did not wish to contradict them.
Besides, I might be deceived."
"Monsieur, you insult the majesty of justice."
"Not at all," said Athos calmly.
"You are Monsieur d'Artagnan."
"You see, monsieur, that you say it again."
"But I tell you, Monsieur Commissary,"
cried Bonacieux in his turn, "there is not the least doubt about the matter. Monsieur d'Artagnan is my tenant, although he does not pay me my rent, and even better on that account ought I know him. Monsieur d'Artagnan is a young man, scarcely 19 or 20, and this gentleman must be 30 at least. Monsieur d'Artagnan is in Monsieur Dessessart's Guards, and this gentleman is in the company of Monsieur de Tréville's Musketeers. Look at his uniform, Monsieur Commissary. Look at his uniform."
"That's true," murmured the commissary. "Pardieu, that's true."
At this moment the door was opened quickly, and a messenger, introduced by one of the gatekeepers of the Bastille, gave a letter to the commissary.
"Oh, unhappy woman!" cried the commissary.
"How? What do you say? Of whom do you speak? It is not my wife, I hope."
"On the contrary, it is of her. Yours is a pretty business."
"But," said the agitated mercer, "do me the pleasure, monsieur, to tell me how my own proper affair can become worse by anything my wife does while I am in prison?"
"Because that which she does is part of a plan concerted between you, of an infernal plan."
"I swear to you, Monsieur Commissary, that you are in the profoundest error, that I know nothing in the world about what my wife had to do, that I am entirely a stranger to what she has done, and that if she has committed any follies, I renounce her, I abjure her, I curse her."
"Bah!" said Athos to the commissary. "If you have no more need of me, send me somewhere. Your Monsieur Bonacieux is very tiresome."
The commissary designated by the same gesture Athos and Bonacieux.
"Let them be guarded more closely than ever."
"And yet," said Athos with his habitual calmness, If it is Monsieur d'Artagnan who is concerned in this matter, I do not perceive how I can take his place." "Do as I bade you," cried the commissary, "and preserve absolute secrecy. You understand." Athos shrugged his shoulders, and followed his guard silently, while Monsieur Bonacieux uttered lamentations enough to break the heart of a tiger. They locked the mercer in the same dungeon where he had passed the night, and left him to himself during the day. Bonacieux wept all day, like a true mercer, not being at all a military man, as he himself informed us. In the evening, about 9 o'clock, at the moment he had made up his mind to go to bed, he heard steps in his corridor. These steps drew near to his dungeon, the door was thrown open, and the guards appeared. "Follow me," said an officer who came up behind the guards. "Follow you!" cried Bonacieux. "Follow you at this hour? Where, my God?" "Where we have orders to lead you." "But that is not an answer." "It is nevertheless the only one we can give."
"Ah, my God, my God!" murmured the poor mercer. "Now indeed I am lost."
And he followed the guards who came for him, mechanically and without resistance. He passed along the same corridor as before, crossed one court, then a second side of a building. At length, at the gate of the entrance court he found a carriage surrounded by 4 guards on horseback. They made him enter this carriage. The officer placed himself by his side. The door was locked, and they were left in a rolling prison. The carriage was put in motion as slowly as a funeral car. Through the closely fastened windows, the prisoner could perceive the houses and the pavement, that was all. But, true Parisian as he was, Bonacieux could recognize every street by the milestones, the signs, and the lamps. At the moment of arriving at St. Paul, the spot where such as were condemned at the Bastille were executed, he was near fainting and crossed himself twice. He thought the carriage was about to stop there. The carriage, however, passed on. Farther on, a still greater terror seized him on passing by the cemetery of Saint-Jean, where state criminals were buried. One thing, however, reassured him. He remembered that before they were buried, their heads were generally cut off, and he felt that his head was still on his shoulders. But when he saw the carriage take the way to La Grève, where he perceived the pointed roof of the Hôtel de Ville, and the carriage passed under the arcade, he believed it was over with him. He wished to confess to the officer, and upon his refusal uttered such pitiable cries that the officer told him that if he continued to deafen him thus, he should put a gag in his mouth. This measure somewhat reassured Bonacieux. If they meant to execute him at La Grève, it could scarcely be worth while to gag him, as they had nearly reached the place of execution. Indeed, the carriage crossed the fatal spot without stopping. There remained then no other place to fear but the Traitor's Cross. The carriage was taking the direct road to it. This time there was no longer any doubt. It was at the Traitor's Cross that lesser criminals were executed. Bonacieux had flattered himself in believing himself worthy of St. Paul or of the Place de Grève. It was at the Traitor's Cross that his journey and his destiny were about to end. He could not yet see that dreadful cross, but he felt somehow as if it were coming to meet him. When he was within 20 paces of it, he heard a noise of people, and the carriage stopped. This was more than poor Bonacieux could endure, depressed as he was by the successive emotions which he had experienced. He uttered a feeble groan, which might have been taken for the last sigh of a dying man, and fainted. End of chapter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 14. The Man of Meung. The crowd was caused, not by the expectation of a man to be hanged, but by the contemplation of a man who was hanged.
The carriage, which had been stopped for a minute, resumed its way, passed through the crowd, threaded the Rue Saint-Honoré, turned into the Rue des Bons Enfants, and stopped before a low door. The door opened. 2 guards received Bonacieux in their arms from the officer who supported him. They carried him through an alley, up a flight of stairs, and deposited him in an antechamber. All these movements had been effected mechanically, as far as he was concerned. He had walked as one walks in a dream. He had a glimpse of objects as through a fog. His ears had perceived sounds without comprehending them. He might have been executed at that moment without his making a single gesture in his own defense, or uttering a cry to implore mercy. He remained on the bench, with his back leaning against the wall and his hands hanging down, exactly on the spot where the guards placed him. On looking around him, however, as he could perceive no threatening object, as nothing indicated that he ran any real danger, as the bench was comfortably covered with a well-stuffed cushion, as the wall was ornamented with a beautiful Cordova leather, and as large red damask curtains, fastened back by gold clasps, floated before the window, he perceived by degrees that his fear was exaggerated, and he began to turn his head to the right and to the left, upward and downward. At this movement, which nobody opposed, he resumed a little courage, and ventured to draw up one leg and then the other. At length, with the help of his 2 hands, he lifted himself from the bench and found himself on his feet. At this moment, an officer with a pleasant face opened a door, continued to exchange some words with a person in the next chamber, and then came up to the prisoner. "Is your name Bonacieux?" said he. "Yes, monsieur officer," stammered the mercer, more dead than alive. "At your service." "Come in," said the officer. And he moved out of the way to let the mercer pass. The latter obeyed without reply, and entered the chamber, where he appeared to be expected. It was a large cabinet, close and stifling, with the walls furnished with arms offensive and defensive, and in which there was already a fire, although it was scarcely the end of the month of September. A square table, covered with books and papers, upon which was unrolled an immense plan of the city of La Rochelle, occupied the center of the room. Standing before the chimney was a man of middle height, of a haughty, proud mien, with piercing eyes, a large brow, and a thin face, which was made still longer by a royal, or an imperial as it is now called, surmounted by a pair of mustaches. Although this man was scarcely 36 or 37 years of age, hair, mustaches, and royal all began to be gray. This man, except the sword, had all the appearances of a soldier, and his buff boots, still slightly covered with dust, indicated that he had been on horseback in the course of the day. This man was Armand Jean Duplessis, Cardinal de Richelieu, not such as he is now represented. Broken down like an old man, suffering like a martyr, his body bent, his voice failing, buried in a large armchair as in an anticipated tomb, no longer living but by the strength of his genius, and no longer maintaining the struggle with Europe but by the eternal application of his thoughts. But such as he really was at this period, that is to say, an active and gallant cavalier, already weak of body, but sustained by that moral power which made of him one of the most extraordinary men that ever lived, preparing, after having supported the Duc de Nevers in his duchy of Mantua, after having taken Nîmes, Castres, and Uzes, to drive the English from the Isle of Ré and lay siege to La Rochelle. At first sight, nothing denoted the cardinal, and it was impossible for those who did not know his face to guess in whose presence they were. The poor mercer remained standing at the door, while the eyes of the personage we have just described were fixed upon him, and appeared to wish to penetrate even into the depths of the pass. "Is this that Bonacieux?" asked he, after a moment of silence. "Yes, monseigneur," replied the officer. "That's well. Give me those papers and leave us." The officer took from the table the papers pointed out, gave them to him who asked for them, bowed to the ground, and retired. Bonacieux recognized in those papers his interrogatories of the Bastille. From time to time the man by the chimney raised his eyes from the writings and plunged them like poniards into the heart of the poor mercer. At the end of 10 minutes of reading and 10 seconds of examination, the cardinal was satisfied. "That head has never conspired," murmured he, "but it matters not. We will see." "You are accused of high treason," said the cardinal, slowly. "So I have been told already, monseigneur," cried Bonacieux, giving his interrogator the title he had heard the officer give him. "But I swear to you I know nothing about it." The cardinal repressed a smile. "You have conspired with your wife, with Madame de Chevreuse, and with my Lord Duke of Buckingham." "Indeed, monseigneur," responded the mercer, "I have heard her pronounce all those names." "And on what occasion?" "She said that the Cardinal de Richelieu had drawn the Duke of Buckingham to Paris to ruin him and to ruin the queen." "She said that?" cried the cardinal with violence. "Yes, monseigneur, but I told her she was wrong to talk about such things, and that his Eminence was incapable—" "Hold your tongue! You are stupid," replied the cardinal. "That's exactly what my wife said, monseigneur." "Do you know who carried off your wife?" "No, monseigneur." "You have suspicions, nevertheless?" "Yes, monseigneur, but these suspicions appeared to be disagreeable to Monsieur the Commissary, and I no longer have them." "Your wife escaped. Did you know that?" "No, monseigneur. I learned it since I have been in prison, and that from the conversation of Monsieur the Commissary, an amiable man." The cardinal repressed another smile. "Then you are ignorant of what has become of your wife since your flight?" "Absolutely, monseigneur, but she has most likely returned to the Louvre." "At 1 o'clock this morning she had not returned." "My God! What can have become of her, then?" "We shall know, be assured. Nothing is concealed from the cardinal. The cardinal knows everything." "In that case, monseigneur, do you believe the cardinal will be so kind as to tell me what has become of my wife?" "Perhaps he may. But you must, in the first place, reveal to the cardinal all you know of your wife's relations with Madame de Chevreuse." "But, monseigneur, I know nothing about them. I have never seen her." "When you went to fetch your wife from the Louvre, did you always return directly home?" "Scarcely ever. She had business to transact with linen drapers, to whose houses I conducted her." "And how many were there of these linen drapers?" "Two, monseigneur." "And where did they live?" "One in Rue de Vaugirard, and the other Rue de la Harpe." "Did you go into these houses with her?" "Never, monseigneur. I waited at the door." "And what excuse did she give you for entering all alone?" "She gave me none. She told me to wait, and I waited." "You are a very complaisant husband, my dear Monsieur Bonacieux," said the cardinal. "He calls me his dear monsieur," said the mercer to himself. "Peste! Matters are going all right." "Should you know those doors again?" "Yes." "Do you know the numbers?"
Yes.
What are they?
Number 25 in Rue de Vaugirard, 75 in Rue de la Harpe.
That's well, said the cardinal. At these words he took up a silver bell and rang it. The officer entered. Go, said he, in a subdued voice, and find Rochefort. Tell him to come to me immediately, if he has returned. The Count is here, said the officer, and requests to speak with your Eminence instantly. Let him come in, then, said the cardinal quickly. The officer sprang out of the apartment with that alacrity which all the servants of the cardinal displayed in obeying him. To your Eminence, murmured Bonacieux, rolling his eyes round in astonishment. 5 seconds had scarcely elapsed since after the disappearance of the officer, when the door opened and a new personage entered. "It is he!" cried Bonacieux. "He? What he?" asked the cardinal. "The man who abducted my wife." The cardinal rang a second time. The officer reappeared. "Place this man in the care of his guards again, and let him wait till I send for him."
"No, Monseigneur, no, it is not he," cried Bonacieux. "No, I was deceived. This is quite another man, and does not resemble him at all. Monsieur is, I'm sure, an honest man."
"Take away that fool," said the cardinal. The officer took Bonacieux by the arms and led him into the antechamber, where he found his 2 guards. The newly introduced personage followed Bonacieux impatiently with his eyes till he had gone out, and the moment the door closed, "They have seen each other," said he, approaching the cardinal eagerly. "Who?" asked his Eminence. "He and she." "The queen and the duke?" cried Richelieu. "Yes."
"Where?"
"At the Louvre."
"Are you sure of it?"
"Perfectly sure." "Who told you of it?" "Madame de Lannoy, who is devoted to your Eminence, as you know." "Why did she not let me know sooner?" "Whether by chance or mistrust, the queen made Madame de Surgis sleep in her chamber, and detained her all day." "Well, we are beaten. Now let us try to take our revenge." "I will assist you with all my heart, Monseigneur. Be assured of that." "How did it come about?" "At 12:30, the queen was with her women." "Where?" "In her bedchamber." "Go on."
"When someone came and brought her a handkerchief from her laundress."
"And then?"
"The queen immediately exhibited strong emotion, and despite the rouge with which her face was covered, evidently turned pale."
"And then? And then?"
"She then arose, and with altered voice, 'Ladies,' said she, 'wait for me 10 minutes. I shall soon return.' Then she opened the door of her alcove and went out."
"Why did not Madame de Lannoy come and inform you instantly?"
"Nothing was certain. Besides, her Majesty had said, 'Ladies, wait for me,' and she did not dare to disobey the queen."
"How long did the queen remain out of the chamber?"
3/4 of an hour."
"None of her women accompanied her?"
"Only Donna Estafania."
"Did she afterward return?"
"Yes, but only to take a little rosewood casket, with her cipher upon it, and went out again immediately."
"And when she finally returned, did she bring that casket with her?"
"No."
"Does Madame de Lannoy know what was in that casket?"
"Yes, the diamond studs which His Majesty gave the queen."
"And she came back without this casket?"
"Yes."
"Madame de Lannoy, then, is of opinion that she gave them to Buckingham?"
"She is sure of it."
"How can she be so?"
"In the course of the day, Madame de Lannoy, in her quality of tirewoman of the queen, looked for this casket, appeared uneasy at not finding it, and at length asked information of the queen."
"And then the queen?"
"The queen became exceedingly red, and replied that having in the evening broken one of those studs, she had sent it to her goldsmith to be repaired."
"He must be called upon, and so ascertain if the thing be true or not."
"I have just been with him."
"And the goldsmith?"
"The goldsmith has heard nothing of it."
"Well, well, Rochefort, all is not lost, and perhaps everything is for the best."
"The fact is that I do not doubt your Eminence's genius."
"Will repair the blunders of his agent, is that it?"
"That is exactly what I was going to say, if your Eminence had let me finish my sentence."
"Meanwhile, do you know where the Duchesse de Chevreuse and the Duke of Buckingham are now concealed?"
"No, Monseigneur, my people could tell me nothing on that head."
"But I know."
"You, Monseigneur?"
"Yes, or at least I guess. They were, one in the Rue de Vaugirard, number 25, the other in the Rue de la Harpe, number 75.
"Does your Eminence command that they both be instantly arrested?"
"It will be too late. They will be both gone."
"But still, we can make sure that they are so."
"Take 10 men of my guardsmen, and search the 2 houses thoroughly."
"Instantly, Monseigneur." And Rochefort went hastily out of the apartment.
The cardinal, being left alone, reflected for an instant and then rang the bell a third time. The same officer appeared. "Bring the prisoner in again," said the cardinal. Monsieur Bonacieux was introduced afresh, and upon a sign from the cardinal, the officer retired. "You have deceived me," said the cardinal sternly.
"I," cried Bonacieux, "I deceive your Eminence?"
"Your wife, in going to Rue de Vaugirard and Rue de la Harpe, did not go to find linen drapers."
"Then why did she go, just God?"
"She went to meet the Duchesse de Chevreuse and the Duke of Buckingham."
"Yes," cried Bonacieux, recalling all his remembrances of the circumstances. "Yes, that's it. Your Eminence is right. I told my wife several times that it was surprising that linen drapers should live in such houses as those, in houses that had no signs, but she always laughed at me. Ah, Monseigneur," continued Bonacieux, throwing himself at his Eminence's feet, "ah, how truly you are the cardinal, the great cardinal, the man of genius whom all the world reveres."
The cardinal, however contemptible might be the triumph gained over so vulgar a being as Bonacieux, did not the less enjoy it for an instant. Then, almost immediately, as if a fresh thought had occurred, a smile played upon his lips, and he said, offering his hand to the mercer, "Rise, my friend. You are a worthy man."
"The cardinal has touched me with his hand. I have touched the hand of the great man," cried Bonacieux. "The great man has called me his friend."
"Yes, my friend, yes," said the cardinal, with that paternal tone which he sometimes knew how to assume, but which deceived none who knew him. "And as you have been unjustly suspected, well, you must be indemnified. Here, take this purse of 100 pistoles, and pardon me."
"I pardon you, Monseigneur?" cried Bonacieux, hesitating to take the purse, fearing, doubtless, that this pretended gift was but a pleasantry. "But you are able to have me arrested. You are able to have me tortured. You are able to have me hanged. You are the master, and I could not have the least word to say. Pardon you, Monseigneur? You cannot mean that."
"Ah, my dear Monsieur Bonacieux, you are generous in this matter. I see it, and I thank you for it. Thus, then, you will take this bag, and you will go away without being too malcontent."
"I go away enchanted."
"Farewell, then, or rather, au revoir."
And the cardinal made him a sign with his hand, to which Bonacieux replied by bowing to the ground. He then went out backward, and when he was in the antechamber the cardinal heard him, in his enthusiasm, crying aloud, "Long life to the Monseigneur! Long life to his Eminence! Long life to the great cardinal!" The cardinal listened with a smile to this vociferous manifestation of the feelings of Monsieur Bonacieux, and then, when Bonacieux's cries were no longer audible, "Good," said he, "that man will henceforward lay down his life for me." And the cardinal began to examine with the greatest attention the map of La Rochelle, which, as we have said, lay open on the desk, tracing with a pencil the line in which the famous dike was to pass, which, 18 months later, shut up the port of the besieged city. As he was in the deepest of his strategic meditations, the door opened, and Rochefort returned. "Well?" said the cardinal, eagerly, rising with a promptitude which proved the degree of importance he attached to the commission with which he had charged the count. "Well," said the latter, "a young woman of about 26 or 28 years of age, and a man of from 35 to 40 have indeed lodged at the two houses pointed out by your Eminence. But the woman left last night, and the man this morning."
"It was they!" cried the cardinal, looking at the clock. "It is now too late to have them pursued. The Duchesse is at Tours, and the Duke at Boulogne. It is in London they must be found."
"What are your Eminence's orders?"
"Not a word of what has passed. Let the queen remain in perfect security. Let her be ignorant that we know her secret. Let her believe that we are in search of some conspiracy or other. Send me the keeper of the seals, Séguier." And that man, what has your Eminence done with him?"
"What man?" asked the cardinal.
"That Bonacieux."
"I have done with him all that could be done. I have made him a spy upon his wife."
The Comte de Rochefort bowed like a man who acknowledges the superiority of the master as great, and retired. Left alone, the cardinal seated himself again and wrote a letter, which he secured with his special seal. Then he rang. The officer entered for the fourth time.
"Tell Vitray to come to me," said he, "and tell him to get ready for a journey."
An instant after, the man he asked for was before him, booted and spurred.
"Vitray," said he, "you will go with all speed to London. You must not stop an instant on the way. You will deliver this letter to Milady. Here is an order for 200 pistoles. Call upon my treasurer and get the money. You shall have as much again if you are back within 6 days, and have executed your commission well."
The messenger, without replying a single word, bowed, took the letter, with the order for the 200 pistoles, and retired. Here is what the letter contained.
"Milady, be at the first ball at which the Duke of Buckingham shall be present. He will wear on his doublet 12 diamond studs. Get as near to him as you can, and cut off 2. As soon as these studs shall be in your possession, inform me." End of chapter.
This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. The Three Musketeers, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 15. Men of the Robe and Men of the Sword. On the day after these events had taken place, Athos, not having reappeared, Monsieur de Tréville was informed by D'Artagnan and Porthos of the circumstance. As to Aramis, he had asked for leave of absence for 5 days, and was gone, it was said, to Rouen on family business. Monsieur de Tréville was the father of his soldiers. The lowest or the least known of them, as soon as he assumed the uniform of the company, was as sure of his aid and support as if he had been his own brother. He repaired then instantly to the office of the lieutenant criminel. The officer who commanded the post of the Red Cross was sent for, and by successive inquiries they learned that Athos was then lodged in the Fort l'Evêque. Athos had passed through all the examinations we have seen Bonacieux undergo. We were present at the scene in which the two captives were confronted with each other. Athos, who had till that time said nothing for fear that D'Artagnan, interrupted in his turn, should not have the time necessary, from this moment declared that his name was Athos, and not D'Artagnan. He added that he did not know either Monsieur or Madame Bonacieux, that he had never spoken to one or the other, that he had come, at about 10 o'clock in the evening, to pay a visit to his friend Monsieur d'Artagnan, but that till that hour he had been at Monsieur de Tréville's, where he had dined. 20 witnesses, added he, could attest the fact, and he named several distinguished gentlemen. Among them was Monsieur le Duc de la Trémouille. The second commissary was as much bewildered as the first had been by the simple and firm declaration of the Musketeer, upon whom he was anxious to take the revenge which men of the robe like, at all times, to gain over men of the sword. But the name of Monsieur de Tréville and that of Monsieur de la Trémouille commanded a little reflection. Athos was then sent to the cardinal, but unfortunately the cardinal was at the Louvre with the king. It was precisely at this moment that Monsieur de Tréville, on leaving the residence of the lieutenant criminel and the governor of the Fort l'Evêque without being able to find Athos, arrived at the palace. As captain of the Musketeers, Monsieur de Tréville had the right of entry at all times. It is well known how violent the king's prejudices were against the queen, and how carefully these prejudices were kept up by the cardinal, who in affairs of intrigue mistrusted women infinitely more than men. One of the grand causes of this prejudice was the friendship of Anne of Austria for Madame de Chevreuse. These two women gave him more uneasiness than the war with Spain, the quarrel with England, or the embarrassment of the finances. In his eyes, and to his conviction, Madame de Chevreuse not only served the queen in her political intrigues, but what tormented him still more, in her amorous intrigues. At the first word the cardinal spoke of Madame de Chevreuse, who, though exiled to Tours and believed to be in that city, had come to Paris, remained there 5 days, and outwitted the police, The king flew into a furious passion. Capricious and unfaithful, the king wished to be called Louis the Just and Louis the Chaste. Posterity will find a difficulty in understanding this character, which history explains only by facts and never by reason. But when the cardinal added that not only Madame de Chevreuse had been in Paris, but still further, that the queen had renewed with her one of those mysterious correspondences which at that time was named a cabal, when he affirmed that he, the cardinal, was about to unravel the most closely twisted thread of this intrigue, that at the moment of arresting in the very act, with all the proofs about her, the queen's emissary to the exiled duchess, a Musketeer had dared to interrupt the course of justice violently, by falling sword in hand upon the honest men of the law, charged with investigating impartially the whole affair, in order to place it before the eyes of the king, Louis XIII could not contain himself, and he made a step toward the queen's apartment with that pale and mute indignation which, when it broke out, led this prince to the commission of the most pitiless cruelty. And yet in all this, the cardinal had not yet said a word about the Duke of Buckingham. At this instant, Monsieur de Tréville entered, cool, polite, and in irreproachable costume. Informed of what had passed by the presence of the cardinal and the alteration in the king's countenance, Monsieur de Tréville felt himself something like Samson before the Philistines. Louis XIII had already placed his hand on the knob of the door. At the noise of Monsieur de Tréville's entrance, he turned round. "You arrive in good time, monsieur," said the king, who, when his passions were raised to a certain point, could not dissemble. "I have learned some fine things concerning your Musketeers." "And I," said Tréville coldly, "I have some pretty things to tell your Majesty concerning these gownsmen." "What?" said the king with hauteur. "I have the honor to inform your Majesty," continued Monsieur de Tréville in the same tone, "that a party of procureurs, commissaries, and men of the police, very estimable people, but very inveterate, as it appears, against the uniform, have taken it upon themselves to arrest in a house, to lead away through the open street, and throw into the Fort l'Evêque, all upon an order which they have refused to show me, one of my, or rather your, Musketeers, sire, of irreproachable conduct, of an almost illustrious reputation, and whom your Majesty knows favorably, Monsieur Athos." "Athos," said the king mechanically. "Yes, certainly I know that name." "Let your Majesty remember," said Tréville, "that Monsieur Athos is the Musketeer who, in the annoying duel which you are acquainted with, had the misfortune to wound Monsieur de Cahusac so seriously. A propos, monseigneur," continued Tréville, addressing the cardinal, "Monsieur de Cahusac is quite recovered, is he not?" "Thank you," said the cardinal, biting his lips with anger. "Athos, then, went to pay a visit to one of his friends absent at the time," continued Tréville, "two young Béarnais, a cadet in his Majesty's Guards, the company of Monsieur Dessessart, but scarcely had he arrived at his friend's and taken up a book while waiting his return, when a mixed crowd of bailiffs and soldiers came and laid siege to the house, broke open several doors—" The cardinal made the king a sign, which signified, "That was on account of the affair about which I spoke to you." "We all know that," interrupted the king, "for all that was done for our service." "Then," said Tréville, "it was also for your Majesty's service that one of my Musketeers, who was innocent, has been seized, that he has been placed between two guards like a malefactor, and that this gallant man, who has 10 times shed his blood in your Majesty's service and is ready to shed it again, has been paraded through the midst of an insolent populace." "Bah!" said the king, who began to be shaken. "Was it so managed?" "Monsieur de Tréville," said the cardinal, with the greatest phlegm, "does not tell your Majesty that this innocent Musketeer, this gallant man, had only an hour before attacked, sword in hand, 4 commissaries of enquiry, who were delegated by myself to examine into an affair of the highest importance." "I defy your Eminence to prove it," cried Tréville, with his Gascon freedom and military frankness. "For 1 hour before, Monsieur Athos, who, I will confide it to your Majesty, is really a man of the highest quality, did me the honor, after having dined with me, to be conversing in the saloon of my hôtel with the Duc de la Trémouille and the Comte de Châlus, who happened to be there." The king looked at the cardinal. "A written examination attests to it," said the cardinal, replying aloud to the mute interrogation of his Majesty, "and the ill-treated people have drawn up the following, which I have the honor to present to your Majesty." "And is the written report of the gownsman to be placed in comparison with the word of honor of a swordsman?" replied Tréville haughtily. "Come, come, Tréville, hold your tongue," said the king. "If his Eminence entertains any suspicion against one of my Musketeers," said Tréville, "the justice of Monsieur the Cardinal is so well known that I demand an inquiry." In the house in which the judicial inquiry was made, continued the impassive cardinal, there lodges, I believe, a young Béarnais, a friend of the Musketeer. Your Eminence means Monsieur d'Artagnan. I mean the young man whom you patronize, Monsieur de Tréville. Yes, your Eminence, it is the same. Do you not suspect this young man of having given bad counsel? To Athos, a man double his age? Interrupted Tréville. No, monseigneur. Besides, D'Artagnan passed the evening with me. Well, said the cardinal, everybody seems to have passed the evening with you. Does your Eminence doubt my word? Said Tréville, with a brow flushed with anger. No, God forbid, said the cardinal. Only at what hour was he with you? Oh, as to that I can speak positively, your Eminence, for as he came in I remarked that it was but 9:30 by the clock, although I had believed it to be later. At what hour did he leave your hotel? At 10:30, an hour after the event. Well, replied the cardinal, who could not for an instant suspect the loyalty of Tréville, and who felt that the victory was escaping him. Well, but Athos was taken in the house at the Rue des Fossoyeurs. Is one friend forbidden to visit another, or a Musketeer of my company to fraternize with a guard of Dessessart's company? Yes, when the house where he fraternizes is suspected. That house is suspected, Tréville, said the king. Perhaps you did not know it. Indeed, sire, I did not. The house may be suspected, but I deny that it is so in the part of it inhabited by my Monsieur d'Artagnan, for I can affirm, sire, if I can believe what he says, that there does not exist a more devoted servant of your Majesty, or a more profound admirer of Monsieur the Cardinal. Was it not this D'Artagnan who wounded Jussac one day, in that unfortunate encounter which took place near the convent of the Carmes Déchaussés? Asked the king, looking at the cardinal, who colored with vexation. And the next day Bernajoux. Yes, sire, yes, it is the same. Your Majesty has a good memory. Come, how shall we decide? Said the king. That concerns your Majesty more than me, said the cardinal. I should affirm the culpability. And I deny it, said Tréville. But his Majesty has judges, and these judges will decide. That is best, said the king. Send the case before the judges. It is their business to judge, and they shall judge. Only, replied Tréville, it is a sad thing that in the unfortunate times in which we live, the purest life, the most incontestable virtue, cannot exempt a man from infamy and persecution. The army, I will answer for it, will be but little pleased at being exposed to rigorous treatment on account of police affairs. The expression was imprudent, but Monsieur de Tréville launched it with knowledge of his cause. He was desirous of an explosion, because in that case the mind throws forth fire, and fire enlightens. Police affairs? Cried the king, taking up Tréville's words. Police affairs. And what do you know about them, monsieur? Meddle with your Musketeers, and do not annoy me in this way. It appears, according to your account, that if by mischance a Musketeer is arrested, France is in danger. What a noise about a Musketeer! I would arrest 10 of them, 100, even all the company, and I would not allow a whisper. From the moment they are suspected by your Majesty, said Tréville, the Musketeers are guilty. Therefore you see me prepared to surrender my sword. For after having accused my soldiers, there can be no doubt that Monsieur the Cardinal will end by accusing me. It is best to constitute myself at once a prisoner with Athos, who is already arrested, and with D'Artagnan, who will most probably be arrested. Gascon-headed man, will you have done? Said the king. Sire, replied Tréville, without lowering his voice in the least, either order my Musketeer to be restored to me, or let him be tried. He shall be tried, said the cardinal. Well, so much the better, for in that case I shall demand of his Majesty permission to plead for him. The king feared an outbreak. If his Eminence, said he, did not have personal motives— The cardinal saw what the king was about to say, and interrupted him. Pardon me, said he, but the instant your Majesty considers me a prejudiced judge, I withdraw. Come, said the king, will you swear by my father that Athos was at your residence during the event, and that he took no part in it? By your glorious father and by yourself, whom I love and venerate above all the world, I swear it. Be so kind as to reflect, sire, said the cardinal. If we release the prisoner thus, we shall never know the truth. Athos may always be found, replied Tréville, ready to answer, when it shall please the gownsmen to interrogate him. He will not desert, Monsieur the Cardinal, be assured of that. I will answer for him. No, he will not desert, said the king. He can always be found, as Tréville said. Besides, added he, lowering his voice and looking with a suppliant air at the cardinal, let us give them apparent security. That is policy. This policy of Louis XIII made Richelieu smile. Order it as you please, sire. You possess the right of pardon. The right of pardoning only applies to the guilty, said Tréville, who was determined to have the last word, and my Musketeer is innocent. It is not mercy, then, that you are about to accord, sire. It is justice. And he is in the Fort l'Evêque? Said the king. Yes, sire, in solitary confinement, in a dungeon, like the lowest criminal. The devil! Murmured the king. What must be done? Sign an order for his release, and all will be said, replied the cardinal. I believe with your majesty that Monsieur de Tréville's guarantee is more than sufficient. Tréville bowed very respectfully, with a joy that was not unmixed with fear. He would have preferred an obstinate resistance on the part of the cardinal to this sudden yielding. The king signed the order for release, and Tréville carried it away without delay. As he was about to leave the presence, the cardinal gave him a friendly smile and said, "A perfect harmony reigns, sire, between the leaders and the soldiers of your Musketeers, which must be profitable for the service and honorable to all." "He will play me some dog's trick or other, and that immediately," said Tréville. "One never has the last word with such a man. But let us be quick. The king may change his mind in an hour, and at all events it is more difficult to replace a man in the Fort l'Evêque or the Bastille who has got out, than to keep a prisoner there who is in." Monsieur de Tréville made his entrance triumphantly into the Fort l'Evêque, whence he delivered the Musketeer, whose peaceful indifference had not for a moment abandoned him. The first time he saw D'Artagnan, "You have come off well," said he to him. "There is your Jussac thrust paid for. There still remains that of Bernajoux, but you must not be too confident." As to the rest, Monsieur de Tréville had good reason to mistrust the cardinal and to think that all was not over, for scarcely had the captain of the Musketeers closed the door after him than his Eminence said to the king, "Now that we are at length by ourselves, we will, if your majesty pleases, converse seriously. Sire, Buckingham has been in Paris 5 days, and only left this morning." End of chapter 15.